The first growl was quiet, almost too quiet for anyone to notice. It came from the far end of the military hospital's veterinary corridor, just after 9 in the morning. A nurse carrying a tray stopped walking. She looked toward the sound. Nothing appeared unusual. One military working dog was sitting beside his handler near an examination room. The German Shepherd looked calm, professional, almost bored. Then the second dog entered the corridor. And everything changed. Both dogs froze. Their handlers immediately noticed. The first German Shepherd stood. The second dog stopped beside his handler. Their ears moved forward. Their eyes locked. Nobody spoke. Then the first dog gave a low, warning growl. The second answered, and within seconds, two highly trained military working dogs that had spent years obeying commands were pulling against their handlers with enough force to send everyone nearby scrambling backward. Get them apart. Move the patients. Keep the doors closed. Don't get between them. The hospital corridor erupted into panic. Even the two experienced handlers couldn't regain control. Then someone shouted for security. Someone else called the veterinary team. And through all the confusion, a new nurse stepped out of a treatment room. Nobody expected her to help. Most people in the hospital barely knew her. Some treated her like she didn't belong there. But when she saw the two dogs, she didn't run. She didn't shout. She simply walked toward them and quietly said 4 words. The dogs stopped. If you enjoy emotional military K9 stories where loyalty, training, and unexpected heroes come together, subscribe to the channel and stay with us. Because sometimes the person everyone overlooks is the one who understands what nobody else can see. The morning had started normally. At Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, the Military Veterinary and Rehabilitation Wing was already busy. Routine examinations, vaccinations, mobility assessments, dental checks, follow-up appointments. Nothing dramatic. Military working dogs came through the facility regularly. Some were active. Some were nearing retirement. Some belonged to different branches and specialized units. The staff knew how to work around them. There were protocols. There were designated waiting areas. Separate entrances when necessary. Handlers remained responsible for their dogs. And everyone understood one simple rule: never assume a trained military working dog is just another pet. These animals were highly disciplined professionals. Their behavior could change quickly depending on stress, environment, and the situation around them. That morning, the first dog scheduled for a routine examination was Bruno, a 7-year-old black and tan German Shepherd, assigned to an Army military police unit. Bruno was powerful without being unusually large, broad chest, athletic build, dark brown eyes. A small patch of silver beginning around his muzzle. He wore a standard working harness and remained close to his handler, Sergeant First Class Nolan Pierce. Nolan had worked with Bruno for almost 4 years. The relationship between them was obvious. Nolan didn't need to constantly issue commands. A glance was often enough. Easy, Nolan said as they entered the veterinary waiting area. Bruno sat. Good. His tail moved once. Nolan smiled. Routine day. Bruno looked up at him. Across the building, another military working dog was arriving. His name was Vega, an 8-year-old Belgian Malinois assigned to a Marine Corps security unit. Vega was leaner than Bruno, long-legged, extremely athletic. His coat was a rich fawn color with a black mask across his face. His handler was Staff Sergeant Marcus Vale. Marcus had been paired with Vega for nearly 3 years. The dog was known for being exceptionally focused during training. He could move from complete stillness to explosive action in seconds. But Marcus trusted him completely. Medical check, Marcus said. Vega walked beside him. Then we're out. Everything seemed normal. The problem was the waiting room. Because of an unexpected scheduling change, both teams were directed toward the same corridor. Neither handler had been warned that the other dog was already there. It was a mistake, a small one, the kind that usually meant nothing. Until Bruno saw Vega. Bruno stood immediately. Nolan's hand went to the harness. Easy. Vega stopped. Marcus noticed. Vega. The Malinois stared at Bruno. Bruno stared back. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then Vega's body became rigid. Bruno's ears went forward. Nolan shortened the leash. Marcus did the same. A veterinary technician looked between them. Let's take them into separate rooms. Good idea, Nolan said. He turned Bruno slightly. But before he could move, Vega gave a sharp bark. Bruno answered. The sound echoed through the corridor. People turned. A child waiting with his mother began crying. A nurse hurried toward the waiting area. What's happening? Keep people back, Marcus said. Yeah, his voice was calm, but his grip had tightened. Both dogs are becoming reactive. Then Bruno lunged, not far. Nolan caught him immediately. But Vega reacted. He pulled forward. Marcus braced his feet. Vega, heel! The dog ignored him. Vega! The Malinois barked again. Bruno answered with a deep growl. And suddenly the two handlers were no longer simply managing excited dogs. They were fighting to prevent two powerful working animals from reaching each other. Get everyone out! A veterinarian shouted. Hospital staff began moving patients away from the corridor. A security officer approached. Should we separate them physically? No, Marcus shouted. Don't get between them. Bruno pulled again. Nolan's shoulder jerked. Vega strained against Marcus. The two dogs were now completely focused on each other. Their bodies were tense. Their hackles raised, their mouths open. Every instinct seemed directed toward the animal standing opposite them. Yet neither handler could understand why. These dogs had encountered other military working dogs before. They had trained around different breeds. They had worked around loud environments. They had been exposed to crowds, vehicles, sirens, equipment, and unfamiliar people. This wasn't normal. A senior veterinarian stepped out of an examination room. What triggered this? Marcus shook his head. Nothing obvious. Nolan nodded. They saw each other, and then that was it. The veterinarian looked concerned. Keep them separated. We're trying. Another bark, another pull. The corridor became louder. Hospital staff pressed themselves against the walls. Someone closed the automatic doors leading toward the main hospital. A security officer asked, "Can we sedate them?" The veterinarian shook his head. "Not unless we absolutely have to. They're trained dogs. I know. They're not responding. I know." And then, the situation became worse. Bruno slipped half a step forward. Vega surged at exactly the same moment. The handlers held their leashes. But the movement was enough to send a metal equipment cart rolling sideways. It crashed into the wall. Several people screamed. The dogs reacted instantly. Their barking became louder. More intense, the hospital corridor erupted into chaos. "Everyone back! Get the patients out! Close that door! Don't touch the dogs!" Nolan struggled to keep Bruno controlled. "Bruno!" The dog didn't respond. Marcus shouted, "Vega, look at me!" Nothing. The two dogs had entered a state of extreme arousal. Their handlers were doing everything their training told them to do. But the environment was making the situation worse. Noise, people, metal, movement, the other dog. Every second added another layer of stimulation. At the end of the corridor, a treatment room door opened. A young nurse stepped out. She looked around. Everyone else was moving away. She didn't. Her name was Claire Bennett, 35 years old, new to the hospital. Only 6 weeks into her position. She wore plain navy blue scrubs, a white hospital ID badge, and a black stethoscope. Her hair was tied into a simple low ponytail. She had no military insignia, no special rank. No reason for anyone to assume she knew anything about military working dogs. And that was exactly why nobody paid attention when she first entered the corridor. Claire looked at Bruno, then Vega, then their handlers. She immediately noticed something everyone else was missing. The dogs weren't simply reacting to each other. They were reacting to the people around them. Every shout made them more alert. Every person moving closer increased their tension. Every command delivered loudly seemed to add another layer of confusion. Claire looked at the veterinary team, then at the security officers, then back at the dogs. She quietly said, "Stop shouting." Nobody heard her. She tried again. Everyone stopped shouting. A security officer looked at her. "Ma'am, please move back." Claire didn't. She watched Vega's eyes, then Bruno's. She understood. The dogs weren't listening because they were being given too many signals at once. Claire took one slow breath. Then she stepped forward. Nolan immediately shouted, "Don't come any closer." Marcus said the same thing. "Stay back!" Claire stopped. She looked at them, then at the dogs. Her voice remained completely calm. "I know." Nolan stared at her. "What?" "I know what they're doing." The veterinarian frowned. "Do you have experience with military working dogs?" Claire didn't answer. Instead, she slowly lowered one hand. Not toward either dog, toward the floor. Both dogs noticed. Their barking softened for half a second. Claire took another careful step. Nolan's face tightened. "Claire, don't." She looked at him. "I'm not going to touch them." Then she turned toward the two dogs and said something that made both handlers go silent. Something neither dog had heard from anyone in that hospital that morning. "Break focus." Bruno's ears moved. Vega's head tilted. Claire took one more step. Her voice became softer. "Eyes on me." The corridor went silent. For the first time, both military working dogs looked away from each other and toward her. For a moment, nobody moved. Bruno's eyes shifted from Vega to Claire. Vega did the same. The barking stopped. Not completely. A low rumble still came from both dogs. But the explosive tension that had filled the corridor only seconds earlier had changed. Claire noticed immediately. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She simply kept her posture relaxed. "Good," she said quietly. "That's better." Nolan stared at Bruno. The Army German Shepherd was still tense, but his attention was no longer completely fixed on Vega. Marcus looked at Claire. "How did you do that?" Claire didn't answer. She kept her eyes on the dogs. "Don't ask me questions yet." Her voice remained calm. "Just give them fewer things to react to." The security officers slowly backed away. The veterinary staff stopped moving. Even the hospital employees who had been watching from doorways became completely still. Claire looked toward the handlers. "Lower your voices." Nolan nodded. Marcus did the same. "Now loosen your shoulders." They looked at her. She continued. "They're reading your tension." Nolan slowly relaxed his grip. Marcus followed. The dogs noticed. Their bodies began to soften. Not much, but enough. Claire took one step sideways. She didn't approach either animal. Instead, she positioned herself where both dogs could see her without having to look directly at each other. Then she raised her hand slightly. "Stay." Both dogs remained still. Claire waited. 5 seconds, 10, 15. Nothing happened. Then Bruno looked at Vega again. His ears went forward. Claire immediately said, "Eyes here." Bruno looked back. Vega followed. Claire nodded. Good. A veterinarian whispered. She's controlling both of them. Claire heard him. She shook her head. No. She kept her eyes on the dogs. I'm giving them something else to focus on. The veterinarian looked confused. Claire continued. They're not machines. They're trained animals. And right now they're overloaded. That distinction mattered. Military working dogs were trained to operate under stress. But training didn't make them immune to stress. A hospital was a strange environment. Different smells. Echoing corridors, metal equipment, unfamiliar people, medical alarms. Others, animals, and in this case, another highly trained dog whose body language was being interpreted as a challenge. Claire understood that the dogs didn't need someone to overpower them. They needed someone to lower the intensity of the environment. Claire looked toward the equipment cart lying against the wall. Move that. A technician hesitated. Claire shook her head. Slowly. 2 staff members carefully moved the cart away. No metal clanging, no shouting, no sudden movements. The dogs watched, but neither reacted. Claire nodded. Good, she looked at Nolan. What's his release command? Nolan answered quietly. Break. Claire nodded. And yours? Marcus answered. Free. Claire looked thoughtful. Don't use them yet. Both handlers nodded. She waited another few seconds. Then she crouched slightly. Bruno's eyes followed her. Vega's did too. Claire said, You're both okay. Her voice was almost conversational. Nobody is asking you to fight. The dogs remained still, she continued. You saw another dog, that's all. A faint whine came from Vega. Claire noticed. Good. She looked at Marcus. He's coming down. Marcus looked at his dog. For the first time, he noticed it too. Vega's breathing had slowed. His tail was no longer rigid. His ears had relaxed slightly. Nolan looked at Bruno. Same with him. Claire nodded. Exactly. A nurse standing near the doorway whispered, Who is she? Another nurse quietly answered, Claire. She's new. I know. How does she know all this? Nobody knew. Claire slowly extended her hand. She didn't touch either dog. She simply allowed them to see it. Then she made a small, deliberate motion with her fingers. Bruno's eyes followed. Vega's eyes followed. She lowered her hand. Both dogs remained focused on her. Claire quietly said, Now. Back. Nolan slowly stepped backward. Bruno followed him. Marcus did the same. Vega followed. The distance between the dogs increased. 1 foot, then 2, then 4. The entire corridor seemed to breathe again. Good. Claire's voice remained steady. Keep moving. The handlers continued backward until they reached opposite sides of the corridor. The dogs were now separated by several yards. But Claire didn't relax yet. She knew that the first calm moment wasn't the end. It was the beginning. A veterinarian approached from behind. Claire immediately raised one hand. Not yet. The veterinarian stopped. If we crowd them now, they'll react again. The veterinarian nodded. How long? Until their breathing is normal. The veterinarian looked toward the dogs. You're sure? Claire nodded. Yes. For the next few minutes, the hospital became strangely quiet. No one shouted. No one rushed. The 2 handlers stood several yards apart. Claire remained between them. Bruno watched her. Vega watched her. The dogs' breathing slowly returned to normal. Their muscles relaxed. Their ears softened, and eventually, Bruno sat. Nolan smiled. Good boy. Vega remained standing. Marcus waited. Then Vega sat too. Marcus quietly exhaled. Good. The corridor erupted in relief. Not cheering. Not yet. Just quiet breaths. Someone whispered, Thank God. Another nurse smiled. The security officer lowered his radio. The veterinarian looked at Claire. I've worked with K9 teams for 12 years. He shook his head. I've never seen anyone settle 2 dogs that quickly. Claire stood. I didn't settle them. She looked toward Bruno and Vega. They settled themselves. Marcus approached Claire carefully. Where did you learn that? Claire looked at him. Learn what? The movements, the commands, the way you positioned yourself. Claire glanced at Bruno. Experience. Marcus smiled. That's not an answer. She gave him a small smile. Maybe later. The situation appeared to be over. But then, a door opened. A technician stepped into the corridor carrying a metal tray. The tray slipped slightly. A loud metallic sound echoed through the hallway. Bruno's head snapped toward it. Vega stood immediately. Both dogs stiffened. Claire turned. Freeze. Everyone stopped. The dogs looked toward her. Claire raised her hand. Eyes here. Bruno looked at her. Vega followed. She waited, then lowered her hand. The dogs sat again. The technician looked horrified. I'm sorry. Claire smiled gently. It's okay. She looked toward the dogs. They're learning that nothing bad is happening. That moment changed the staff's perception of her. She wasn't simply someone who had gotten lucky. She understood the animals, and yet, not everyone was impressed. A senior hospital administrator standing at the end of the corridor looked irritated. His name was Richard Sloan. He had been openly dismissive of Claire since she started working at the hospital 6 weeks earlier. He believed she was inexperienced, too quiet, too cautious, not assertive enough for a demanding military hospital. He had criticized her documentation, questioned her decisions, and once told another nurse, she needs to learn how things work here. Now he watched her calm 2 military working dogs that several experienced people couldn't control. His expression didn't soften. Instead, it hardened. That's enough. Richard's voice cut through the corridor. Claire looked toward him. He walked closer. Take the dogs to separate examination rooms. Claire nodded. Yes. Richard looked at the handlers. You heard him. Nolan frowned. Sir? Separate rooms. Nolan glanced toward Claire. She nodded. It's okay. The handlers moved. Bruno followed Nolan. Vega followed Marcus. Claire remained behind as the dogs disappeared into separate treatment rooms. She finally allowed herself to breathe. A nurse approached her. You okay? Claire nodded. Yes. That was incredible. Claire smiled. Thank you. The nurse lowered her voice. Why didn't you tell anyone you knew how to handle K9s? Claire looked down the corridor. Nobody asked. That answer stayed with the nurse, because it was true. Claire hadn't been hired as a K9 specialist. She was a nurse. She had arrived at the hospital quietly. She had done her work. She had stayed late. She had helped patients. And yet, several people had already decided who she was. The new nurse, the quiet nurse, the one who didn't belong. They had never asked what she had done before coming there. Later that afternoon, Nolan returned from Bruno's examination. He found Claire at the nurse's station. Can I ask you something? Claire looked up. Sure. Where did you actually learn that? She hesitated, then answered. I spent several years supporting military K9 teams. Nolan's eyebrows rose. Which branch? Claire smiled faintly. That's complicated. Marcus approached from behind. I knew it. Claire turned. Marcus folded his arms. You've done this before. She nodded. Yes. How many dogs? Claire thought for a moment. Enough to know that every dog is different. Nolan smiled. That's probably the smartest answer I've heard today. The 2 handlers exchanged a look. Then Marcus said, Vega doesn't usually react like that. Nolan nodded. Neither does Bruno. Claire looked thoughtful. Then something about the environment triggered them. What? I don't know yet. Marcus frowned. What do you mean? Claire looked toward the two examination rooms. They recognized something in each other. Different forces? Maybe. But they're both military working dogs. Exactly. She paused. They may have been trained differently. Nolan nodded. Army, Marcus said. Marine Corps. Claire continued. Different handlers, different routines, different commands, different expectations. She looked between them. To us, they were two dogs. But to them, she paused. They were two unfamiliar working animals suddenly meeting inside a confined environment. Nolan nodded slowly. That makes sense. Marcus looked toward the examination room. So they're not enemies. Claire smiled. No, they were never enemies. That evening, Claire was finishing her shift when she heard something from the veterinary corridor. A bark. Then another. She immediately stopped. The hospital had become quiet. Most staff had gone home. Claire walked toward the sound. She reached the corner and stopped. Bruno and Vega were being taken from their separate examination rooms at the same time. Their handlers hadn't realized they were approaching each other again. The dogs saw each other. Their bodies stiffened. Claire's heart dropped. The same tension returned. Nolan tightened Bruno's leash. Marcus stepped back with Vega. The dogs stared at each other. And before anyone could react, Claire stepped into the corridor. She looked at both dogs, then calmly said, "Remember this morning." Both dogs looked at her. Claire took one slow step forward, then another. And this time, neither dog growled. Instead, they sat together. The handlers stared in disbelief. Claire smiled. Good. Then she looked at the two powerful military working dogs. You don't have to like each other. She paused. You just have to trust that you're safe. Bruno's ears relaxed. Vega's tail moved once. And for the first time, the two dogs looked at each other without aggression. Not friends, not yet, but no longer enemies. Claire turned to leave. Marcus called after her. Wait. She stopped. Thank you. She looked back. He smiled. You saved us from a very long night. Claire laughed softly. No. She looked at the dogs. They just needed someone to remind them who they were. And as she walked away, neither handler noticed the small smile on her face. Because Claire knew something they didn't. She hadn't told them everything. She hadn't told them about the years she had spent around military K9 units. She hadn't told them about the dogs she had helped rehabilitate. And she certainly hadn't told them why she had left that world behind. That part of her story was still a secret. And soon, someone at the hospital was going to discover exactly who the new nurse really was. The next morning, Claire arrived before sunrise. The hospital corridors were almost empty. Only the quiet sounds of cleaning equipment, distant monitors, and the occasional footsteps of overnight staff disturbed the silence. Claire carried a paper cup of coffee as she walked toward the veterinary wing. She expected another ordinary shift. Instead, she found Nolan Pierce waiting outside Bruno's examination room. He looked tired, but he was smiling. Morning. Claire stopped. Morning. Nolan held out his phone. Look. On the screen was a photograph. Bruno was sitting calmly beside Nolan. A few feet away, Vega sat beside Marcus. Both dogs were looking in the same direction, toward each other. But neither was tense. Claire smiled. That's progress. Nolan nodded. More than progress. He lowered the phone. They were in the same hallway for 10 minutes yesterday. And nothing. Claire smiled. Good. Nolan studied her. There's something else. Claire waited. The command you gave them. What about it? I've heard that command before. Claire's expression changed slightly. Nolan continued. Not from our unit. He looked at her carefully. From a Navy K9 instructor. Claire said nothing. And the hand signal. Nolan paused. That's not something you learn in ordinary nursing training. Claire looked away. You're very observant. I work with dogs. So do I. Nolan smiled. I think there's a lot you haven't told us. Claire looked through the examination room window. Bruno was resting comfortably. Maybe. Before Nolan could ask another question, Marcus walked into the corridor. He looked between them. Still interrogating the new nurse? Nolan laughed. Trying. Marcus looked at Claire. Don't worry. He does that to everyone. Claire smiled. Then Marcus's expression became serious. Vega is ready. For his examination? Yes. Good. He hesitated. There's something I wanted to ask you. Claire looked at him. Go ahead. Yesterday when you told us not to separate them by force. Yes? How did you know they'd respond? Claire thought for a moment. I didn't know. Marcus frowned. I made an educated guess. You seemed pretty certain. Claire smiled. That's because uncertainty makes dogs nervous. Marcus laughed. That's an answer. The morning passed peacefully. Bruno completed his examination. Vega completed his. Both dogs were healthy. Both handlers were relieved. And, most importantly, neither dog showed aggression toward the other. By lunchtime, the story had spread through the hospital. Everyone had heard about the two military working dogs. Everyone had heard about the new nurse. And everyone had a different version of what happened. Some said Claire had special K9 training. Others claimed she had been a military handler. One person said she had worked with police dogs. Another insisted she had simply gotten lucky. Claire ignored all of it. She didn't correct anyone. She just did her job. But Richard Sloane hadn't forgotten. The hospital administrator had watched everything, and he wasn't convinced that Claire belonged in the veterinary wing. He found her during the afternoon. Claire, she turned. Yes, my office. She followed him. The door closed. Richard sat behind his desk. Claire remained standing. You've created quite a bit of attention. Claire looked confused. Because of yesterday? Yes. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. He leaned back. I'm asking where you learned to handle military working dogs. Claire remained silent. Your employment file doesn't mention it. No. Why? Because it wasn't relevant to the position. Richard frowned. It became relevant yesterday. Claire nodded. I understand. So? Claire took a breath. I had previous experience. What kind? She looked at him. Military K9 emergency response. Richard stared. You're telling me you have formal military K9 experience? Yes. Why didn't you tell anyone? Nobody asked. Richard leaned forward. Who did you work for? Claire hesitated, then quietly answered, the Navy. The room became silent. Richard looked genuinely surprised. You were Navy? No, I worked alongside Navy K9 units. He studied her. For how long? Almost 8 years. Richard sat back. 8 years? Claire nodded. Before becoming a nurse. Richard looked at the employment file again, then back at her. Why didn't this appear in your application? Because my nursing qualifications were what you hired me for. Richard shook his head. You could have told me. Would it have changed anything? He didn't answer. Claire understood. She had known from the beginning how people would react. Some would respect her. Some would question her. Some would assume she was trying to impress people. So she had chosen silence. Richard looked toward the window. Those dogs could have seriously injured someone. I know. You walked toward them. I knew they weren't committed to attacking people. Richard looked back. How? Claire answered calmly. Because they kept looking at their handlers. What does that mean? They were searching for direction. She paused. An animal committed to attacking usually doesn't keep checking for permission. Richard considered that. So you knew they wouldn't bite? No. Claire shook her head. I knew there was a better way to reduce the risk. Richard was silent. Finally, he nodded, understood. When Claire left the office, she expected the same cold reception she had received since arriving. Instead, a nurse was waiting outside. It was Tessa Grant, one of the staff members who had witnessed the entire incident. She smiled. I heard. Claire sighed. If you're here to ask about the dogs, no. Tessa shook her head. I wanted to say I'm sorry. Claire frowned. For what? For how everyone treated you. Claire didn't answer. Tessa continued. We thought you were just new. I was. No. Tessa smiled. We thought you didn't know anything. Claire looked down. That's okay. It isn't. Tessa shook her head. We should have asked. That sentence meant more to Claire than Tessa realized. Because Claire had spent years learning that people often saw uniforms before they saw individuals. She had watched handlers treated as soldiers first and caregivers second. She had watched K9 teams dismissed as just dogs by people who had never seen what those animals could do. And she had experienced the same thing herself. People looked at her scrubs. They saw a new nurse. They never wondered what had come before. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. The hospital received a call. The Navy K9 program had heard about the incident. A senior K9 operations officer wanted to speak with the hospital, not because the dogs had fought, but because someone had managed to calm two highly trained military working dogs during a high-stress confrontation without physical restraint. The hospital director arranged a meeting. Claire was asked to attend. She almost refused. Then she saw the name on the meeting request, Commander Daniel Whitaker. She knew him, not personally, but she knew the name. He had overseen one of the K9 programs Claire had supported years earlier. When she entered the conference room, Commander Whitaker looked up. He didn't recognize her. Then his expression changed. Claire? She stopped. Hello, Commander. He stood. I haven't seen you in years. I know, he smiled. Last time I saw you, you were working with the rehabilitation team. Claire nodded. That was a long time ago. Whitaker looked toward the hospital director. You hired her? The director nodded. She's one of our nurses. Whitaker smiled. She's much more than that. Claire looked uncomfortable. Commander, he raised a hand. I'm not going to embarrass you. Then he looked at everyone around the table. Claire spent years working with military K9 teams, AVI, behavioral rehabilitation, emergency response, handler support, canine stress management. He paused, and she was very good at it. The hospital director looked at Claire. Why didn't you tell us? Claire smiled. Because I wanted to be a nurse. Whitaker nodded. That sounds like Claire. The meeting continued. Whitaker explained that the incident had actually provided valuable information. Not about which dog was aggressive, but about how military facilities should manage encounters between working dogs from different units. He asked Claire to help develop a short training protocol for hospital staff. Claire agreed, but she had one condition. Don't teach them how to control dogs. Whitaker looked curious. What should we teach? How to understand them. A few weeks later, the hospital introduced a new K9 emergency awareness program. It wasn't complicated. Staff learned how to reduce noise, how to create distance, how to identify escalation, how to avoid sudden movements, how to contact handlers, and Most importantly, how to avoid turning a frightened or overstimulated animal into a more dangerous one. Claire helped teach the first session. Bruno and Vega were used only for calm demonstration exercises. They sat several feet apart. No aggression, no tension. Just two working dogs calmly observing each other. At the end of the session, Nolan looked at Claire. "I still can't believe those were the same dogs." Claire smiled. "They're the same dogs." She looked at Bruno. "They just don't think they have to fight anymore." Marcus laughed. Vega leaned against his leg. "Think they'll ever become friends?" Claire looked at the two dogs. "Maybe." Nolan smiled. "They already look like it." Claire shook her head. "No," she smiled. "They're just learning how to coexist." Months passed. The incident became hospital history. The staff stopped calling Claire the new nurse. She became simply Claire. People began asking for her opinion. Veterinary staff consulted her when difficult behavioral situations arose. Nurses stopped overlooking her. Even Richard Sloane became noticeably more respectful. One morning, he passed Claire in the corridor. "Morning. Morning," he paused. "Good work with the K9 program. Thank you." He smiled, then continued walking. It was a small moment. But Claire noticed it. Sometimes respect didn't arrive with an apology. Sometimes it arrived quietly. One afternoon, Claire was preparing to leave when she heard a familiar sound. A soft bark. She turned. Bruno was standing beside Nolan. Vega stood beside Marcus. Both dogs were wearing their working harnesses. They had been cleared for duty. Claire smiled. "You're leaving?" Nolan nodded. "Back to training tomorrow," Marcus added, both of them. Claire crouched. Bruno walked toward her. He stopped directly in front of her. Claire placed one hand on his shoulder. "Be good." His tail moved. Vega approached too. She placed her other hand against his chest. "And you?" Marcus laughed. "He listens to you." Claire smiled. "Only because you taught him how." The two handlers prepared to leave. Then Nolan stopped. "Claire." She looked up.
"Yes?"
"Thank you." She smiled. "You already said that." "I know." He glanced at Bruno. "But I never said it properly." Claire waited. "You didn't just stop a fight." He looked at Vega. "You reminded us that our dogs aren't machines." Marcus nodded. "They have emotions. They react to what we give them." Claire smiled. "Exactly." The dogs stood calmly beside their handlers. No growling, no tension, no challenge. Just two highly trained military working dogs. From different branches standing in the same hallway. The same hallway where, months earlier, people had been running for cover. Before leaving, Nolan looked back. "You know what I think?" Claire smiled. "What?" "Maybe they were never fighting, because they belonged to different forces." Claire raised an eyebrow. "Then why?" Nolan looked at the dogs. "Maybe they just didn't understand each other." Claire nodded. "That's usually the problem." The doors closed behind them. Claire stood alone in the corridor. For a moment, she thought about how differently everything had changed. When she first arrived at the hospital, people barely noticed her. She ate lunch alone, worked quietly, and went home. Some staff treated her as though she had something to prove. She never argued, never demanded respect. She simply waited. Then one morning, two military working dogs had reminded everyone of something she already knew. That sometimes the person who looks inexperienced is simply the person whose experience nobody bothered to ask about. And Claire never forgot that morning. Not because she had stopped two aggressive dogs. She hadn't. She had simply recognized what was happening before fear took over. She had lowered the noise, given them space, used familiar signals, and allowed their training to work. The dogs had done the rest. That was the truth. There had been no magic command, no secret trick, no supernatural connection. Just experience, patience, and an understanding that behind every military working dog was a highly trained animal, responding to an environment it didn't fully understand. Months later, Bruno and Vega were photographed together during a joint military training exercise. They were sitting several feet apart, calm, focused. Their handlers stood behind them. The photograph was eventually displayed in the hospital's veterinary wing. Beneath it, someone had added a simple caption: "Different uniforms. Same mission. Trust first." Claire saw it one morning. She smiled, then kept walking. Because she didn't need the hospital to know everything she'd done before arriving. She didn't need recognition. She didn't need a medal. She had learned long ago that the most important moments in her career weren't the ones people applauded. They were the quiet ones. The moments when an animal finally relaxed, when a frightened handler finally trusted someone, when a patient finally opened their eyes, when someone who felt invisible finally realized they had been seen. And perhaps that was why Claire had been the right person for Bruno and Vega that morning, because she understood what it felt like to be misunderstood, to be underestimated, to be judged before anyone knew your story. And when she looked into those two dogs' eyes, she recognized something familiar. They didn't need to be punished for reacting. They needed someone to understand why. If this story meant something to you, subscribe for more emotional military K9 stories about loyalty, courage, second chances, and the people who understand these incredible animals when others don't. And tell us in the comments, have you ever seen two dogs suddenly become aggressive toward each other? Or have you ever had a moment when your dog completely surprised you? Share your story below, because sometimes the biggest difference between chaos and calm isn't strength. It isn't authority. It isn't force. It's simply having someone who knows when to step forward and quietly say, "I understand."